Morning.
How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm doing wonderful. I am very excited about today's topic, and we're focused on mental readiness, job displacement, and performance outcome. As I am having more conversations with others, I'm realizing how relevant this information is across every industry and workforce demographic. It doesn't limit itself for me. So, what I'd love for us to do today is to have some honest dialogue about the emotional, mental, and professional realities that many people experience during workforce transition. It's also experienced during organizational change, restructuring, layoffs, or career disruption. I think oftentimes we tend to forget that there are other situations that could also trigger that emotional, mental, and professional realities that people face. Um, I'll tell you, these experiences, even from a business and operational perspective, there's that human impact, and we tend to forget about the human impact. And while
Definitely.
I can respect business leaders, they're driving, they're looking at the numbers. We're all are experiencing, I'm witnessing firsthand organizations going through all of the change. The bottom line is, how do they save money? But they're forgetting about the impact to the person, the people, and then their families. So what I've recognized is that workforce readiness is no longer about technical skills or qualifications. There has to be some aspect of mental preparedness, emotional resilience, self care, just that ability to navigate ambiguity. These are all essential components right now for an individual's well being as well as their professional performance. Do you agree?
Yes, absolutely. I do. And I mean, I think the reason that workforce displacement impacts people beyond like financial and employment status is with their self identity. It's really a grieving process when someone loses a job. It's very similar. Um, it impacts them. They might have anxiety, depression, anger, resentment, but especially the loss of identity and worth. So many women, I mean, and men to a certain extent, and men as well, but right now we're focusing on women,
Yeah.
have their identities is very much wrapped up in their employment or their job.
I love it. I love it. And you know what? What I want to do is just to make sure that, the listeners realize how fortunate they are to be hearing from you, Dr. Tilton. Being a licensed psychologist, I know you bring an incredibly important perspective around emotional wellness, coping strategies, resilience, and that psychological impact of organizational and career transition. And so I'm very fortunate to bring my skills as an HR executive with yours, and
Yeah.
really just to talk about this topic that, again, is often missed. But I really want to make sure I call out that today we're going to dedicate this topic to women. We want to focus in on women. It is not to suggest that our amazing male partners are excluded from there, but we know statistically we have a lot of women who are being impacted in today's workforce. We know that the priority in terms of family responsibility has shifted, and we know that there are certain segments of our population that women end up as the primary breadwinner. And we know that with everything that's happening right now, the topic is not just on displacements. It could be internal movements. It could be any kind of job disruption. All of those things will have an impact on your mental preparedness. So I'm fortunate to be partnering with you,
Yeah.
Dr. Tilton, and I'm looking forward to just a deeper conversation about this topic. So I'm thinking we could start with the human impact of displacement. I know you were sharing, a little bit about, the depression and a lot of the emotional impacts there. I'd love to be able to go a little deeper about the financial and employment status, because I will tell you, I am currently in my role with Symmetry Alliance. We do a lot of working with organizations focused in on restructuring, reengineering. And again, at the heart of every conversation is really, how do organizations save money?
Yeah.
While the finances are very, very important, I am currently in a situation where someone is talking about the impact to their people. And while they're looking at the numbers that are being saved, my mind is taking me to, and I'm empathizing with those individuals who are going to be impacted with the notice that they're losing their jobs, because they're losing sight of these people have families, they have lives, they have commitments. And while I'm hearing displacement services and a displacement package is available, I've not heard one word around the mental impact that these
Yeah.
women are about to face.
And that's so important, because, like you said, I mean, these are people. They're not just, numbers. And they, like you said, they have family, they have children, they have other responsibilities, that are all, tied to finances, to a certain extent. Because if you don't have health insurance, you're not getting paid. Um, that adds a lot of pressure and stress to your life. Um, and more women than men have caregiving responsibilities.
I would agree.
So that adds another, I mean, to figure out how to run your household and take care of your children, do everything else they need to do, while also worrying, being preoccupied, like, when am I going to get paid again? How am I going to get health benefits? What if something happens to me or my children? We need to go to the doctor. Um, it just creates a lot of questions that, probably going round and round and round in their mind, trying to figure out the answers to those while also, taking care of their kids.
Absolutely. Those emotional realities that many women face. And I think oftentimes people do not realize that because you have a lot of women who are contributing to the household, well, that income now is taken away.
Yeah.
And so, to your point, they do a lot of the primary caretaking. We have a lot of men who are involved in the caretaking of their children in their home, but statistically, most women take that role. And given that they are contributing financially, emotionally, and psychologically to the family, it is one of those situations where, as you think about what is being faced in today's world, especially by women, it is compounded stress. And the other reality, I know you and I had, we did a podcast before with someone who admitted that they were struggling. They are
Yeah.
a single female, and she was very clear to state that she's lost her insurance. And so she was courageous enough to share that she was using her insurance for therapy. And now that's out the window. So whatever mechanisms and support that they have in place from a financial standpoint, the downstream implication is now I can no longer afford, because I don't have insurance. I
Yeah.
can no longer afford the therapy. So all of this is compounded through displacement and job loss and job disruption.
Yeah, and as in terms of her going to therapy to try to maybe, learn coping skills, or how to maybe, balance responsibilities or whatever issues she was working on. That's something someone said to me, what's the way I could cope with this while kind of regrouping or going through the grieving process? One of the first things I would say is I'll go to therapy. So for someone to not have that option anymore, I mean, that's a problem.
That's really tough. That is really tough. It worries me though when you start thinking about that, because if that individual is in a situation where she can't afford the therapy, then what's the outlet? What do you
Yeah.
recommend as a licensed psychologist if you are facing these financial situations through job disruption or displacement? And then what are the outlets? And then the second part of my question, Dr. Tilton, is, and then how does that person mentally prepare to sell herself, right? During job
Oh,
interviews,
yeah.
engagements, trying to build a business. Let's say if that person wants to do the next step, then how does one prepare themselves when they are in that situation? What are some options?
Well, I mean, the first is kind of process the grief,
Yes.
recognize that your feelings are valid, allow yourself to grieve the loss of routine, colleagues, status, without rushing directly into, like, I need to fix this. I need to apply to like 50
Mm,
companies a day,
mm,
and not making the cover letters personalized, just doing like mass applications. Just take a moment, take a breath, really think about how you want to approach it, and do some, which I think we're going into later, some self-care,
mhm,
um, and then to reframe the narrative, like when they go to interview again, to really control the narrative and
mm.
sell themselves, as perhaps I took a break, like it wasn't an unintentional break. I intentionally took a break to evaluate my career, and I mean, I'm not saying lie, but to reevaluate my career and maybe pivot and go in a different direction. So I took some time off, and this is what I did with my time off. Whether you volunteer, you just, work in community groups, work with other, go to groups or, get support from other people who've been displaced. There are a bunch of programs that you can go to, and they'll help like guide you through steps on what to do and how to do it. And they're just for women. So yeah, I
I
think
love that. I want to make sure we pause and be very intentional, because for those women who are listening that are currently in that state, I love the list that you just shared. You can volunteer. It is a way that you can give back. You're still honing your skills. You're still engaging. It gives you purpose. And I know we'll talk a little bit later in the discussion around identity, but there could be components of that could be restored by serving and giving others. I love the recommendation around connecting with others who are experiencing that. There are online groups. I am a proud United States Air Force veteran, and there are women veteran groups that I participated in because, as I've shared before, I've gone through displacement, and it's such a challenge because I did not have opportunity for the mental readiness and therapy to be offered to me as a part of my displacement. I sought those opportunities. So there could be support groups that you can be a part of. Now, this is a Shantaeism, Dr. Tilton. You have to be careful, because some of those groups, what you don't want is to inadvertently land in a group that is perpetuating a lot of the negativity. Exactly. So you have to be very intentional, because you could be at a very fragile state, and what you don't want is to be fed negativity. So use intention when it comes to the support group you want to be a part of. But I think that is a fabulous idea, because again, in my mind, mental preparedness and career readiness are equal. And I think oftentimes people look at them as competing, but they're not. They both should be priorities. Don't you agree?
Yeah. And I think, really to lean into networks of other professionals. There's organizations like Three Pillars, Women's Employment Network, Alleviate Network, that they provide mentorship and resources designed to help women rebuild their resilience.
I love that.
So that's a very positive way to do it. And again, I mean, if it ends up not to be a positive group, then, maybe search elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. You give yourself permission.
Out there. Yeah.
Definitely give and that's empowering, and making a decision and taking that control, which I think it's a great segue to, one of the topics and things that I hear often is a lot of us have operated so much where we have become really our routine, getting up, going into work, et cetera. And we don't even recognize when the anxiety, when the stress, when the burnout hits. And I'm sure that could be exasperated, especially during a job search, and especially as women try to navigate so many different emotional realities. What can you share? How can you help women recognize when they're dealing with stress, burnout, or anxiety? And, how can they navigate that? First, identifying it, but then being able to better understand how do they move towards well-being and improving their performance. And I want it to be both for those who are navigating displacement, and then for those individuals who are still in the workplace that are dealing with the anxiety and stress about potentially losing their job. So what are some mechanisms you'd recommend, just as an expert within this space?
Well, an anxiety, if it reaches the level of an anxiety disorder, any disorder by definition has to have a negative impact on your educational or occupational functioning. So I think, when you start to notice maybe, I don't want to go to work, I'm getting there late, I'm leaving early, I'm, watching the clock all day long because I'm so miserable or so worried that I just want to go home. Once your performance starts to be affected, that's when you have to kind of take a step back and be like, okay, what's going on with me? I mean, there's a lot of stress. There's, depression, which could also rise to the level of major depressive disorder. I mean, there's also lesser levels of those too, as well, of course. But I think you really have to like really try to be in tune with yourself and recognize, okay, I'm really anxious. Am I not sleeping at night? And maybe that's affecting, my performance the next day,
Mhm.
or, like sleep disruption, appetite disruption, just, thoughts going through like on a loop over and over and over. Um, those impact you on a daily basis, and they impact your mental health and your physical health as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I love that. I think the most important aspect is really being able to identify it. And to your point, if your sleep is disrupted, if you can't focus, all of those things, again, within your area of specialty that you just shared, that's important for women to keep in mind. Because oftentimes we think that that is normal and when it's not, right? And so when you experience it often.
Well, yeah, and I think, to recognize they're not alone in having those feelings. It's
Mhm.
not, they're not quote unquote crazy for having these feelings. They're not, it's not a negative to have these feelings. It's a negative when it affects your performance. I mean,
Absolutely.
that's the difference. It's feeling anxious or depressed or stressed out. Those are natural reactions. Those are normal reactions to, like, an abnormal situation, perhaps. Like, say you'd felt so confident and successful in your company, and then suddenly they're doing like reorganization or layoffs or whatever, then, you kind of might lose that self confidence. So, I mean, that's not a normal situation from a day to day perspective to have like, structural change, whatever. That's usually like
Really.
if a company gets bought by another company or how management changes, whatever. But,
Yeah.
um, yeah,
I,
you're
I
not,
mean, I can appreciate all of that, Dr. Tilden, because that's exactly what I'm hearing now. As I shared in a conversation now, just working with a company that's looking at some restructuring, what they've noticed is the productivity level of their team members seem to be down. They've noticed an increase in requests to work remotely. There's impacts to individuals in their level of engagements. Instead of people showing up for meetings, they're dialing in. And so they're wondering if they're looking at it as, okay, well, this is a way that individuals can self-select to be displaced. And I'm trying to explain to them that that's not the case, that it's very important you recognize that if a person is thinking that they are losing a job, right? Because think about it, and we'll get into identity and alignment with jobs, but individuals are not going to go above and beyond, especially when you think about all of the competing priorities women have to deal with in life. If you've announced, and with good faith, from a transparency standpoint, that your organization is going through changes, well, for many of us, especially a lot of women, especially those who are primary breadwinners, their mind is, how do I continue to sustain, work, my family, my mental health? And so, of course, they're going to see this. But what I get is, and I'm trying to do, is to help them understand you should be leveraging and looking at ways that you can address their mental preparedness for this potential displacement, not just the ones that are leaving, but if you're looking at and they're losing sight of the mental preparedness connected to organizational effectiveness, there is a connection between the two. Because if I'm sitting like I'm waiting like a duck, or sitting like a duck, or whatever that expression is,
yeah.
you're not going to get my all, and
Oh,
it's not
yeah.
going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, when you're spending most of your day worrying like if you're going to be there tomorrow or next week or next month, that's going to make you less productive. You know,
Absolutely,
Probably
absolutely.
working maybe at a slower pace, or, spending your time looking for jobs online in anticipation, that you do get laid off,
And,
which is
and the
not a good thing to do at the workplace.
Absolutely. And the last thing they're going to do is worry about delivering this wonderful report when they don't know if they're going to have a job next month.
Exactly.
And so all of those are the realities. And it's interesting because I took the opportunity in the conversation with the head of HR to talk about, EAP, and to talk about therapy. And I talked about Lamco Wellness because I do applaud Lamco, because the focus is not just, is while it's therapy, it's also looking at, this from an organizational standpoint or an individual standpoint. And I know you won't be surprised by this, but they've not connected the dots. Many organizations have not connected the need for mental preparedness and career readiness. And I think a lot of it is because people don't associate the two. They think that they're separate, separate identities and elements, where there is the connection, because the conduit is the human, it's the person, right? And they lose
Yeah.
sight of that.
And
And
like job loss abruptly removes external validation in your routine that you had.
mm-hmm.
So then, and then with like caregiver conflict, women who have children face like disproportionate they have more disproportionate problems with women who have kids to reintegrate into the workforce,
Absolutely.
because then maybe they'd be like, okay, now I have to pay for childcare because I'm not going to be there anymore, and that's expensive.
It is.
Yeah, and again, like they tend to lose their identity, and that doesn't feel good, and it doesn't make people more productive.
Absolutely. Well, you think about it, a lot of women spend their years building their career, connecting the sense of value to their title and their job.
Yeah.
And so a lot of that is innate. And so once that's taken away from the person, and then of course there is this sense of loss. And we also tend to forget that with displacement and change, especially when you think about, in most workplaces, you do have the female who is really the center of engagement, right? Not to suggest or perpetuate stereotypes that women are admins and they schedule the parties and do a lot of that. But in a lot of organizations, that female presence is the reason why a lot of the engagement takes place. Well, guess what? Work relationships are formed, right? Your identity as a get stuff done is formed. I mean, there's so many different identities that are created being in the workplace. And then when that's taken away, that's a disruption, right? That person is trying to, I'm thinking, mentally connect back to, this is my routine. This is the credibility I've built with this identity. And then there's the gap. And then what I think about is, well, then what resources are available for me to navigate through that and get myself mentally prepared for that next opportunity? Because I believe that's where that gap happens. I think that's the friction point. It is losing that, or creating that identity, then losing that identity. And now I'm having to sell myself and sell my purpose and my value again after I've lost it, and not really reconciling the why behind it. Can you say a little bit more about that, especially in your area of expertise?
Yeah, I mean, I think the psychological toll is immense when you lose your job. It abruptly removes your external validation, your routine. Women of color and those in male-dominated industries often endure additional layers of marginalization. Women of color are more disproportionately losing their jobs, and then face, not just women of color, but women in general, face like mountains to get back into the workforce. And then if you can't focus and you're not thinking as clearly because you're stressed and anxious, depressed, then how are you going to sit down and really focus on writing a great cover letter and present, really selling yourself when you have that interview? So that's, earlier I alluded to the fact that when you want to control the narrative when you start to apply and have interviews and stuff like that. And so I think it's really helpful for women to sit down and think, okay, these are all my transferable skills. This is what other like volunteering has brought to the table for me. In the forefront of, giving back and interacting with other people, maybe being in, you maybe do something like fundraising or whatever for the volunteer organizations, but, really giving a lot of thought to what do I contribute, and really selling that part of yourself.
I love that. And if you have to believe it though. So what I can appreciate, Dr. Tilton, is your comment, and recognizing that, there's been a disproportionate number of Black women who have been impacted these last 12 or 18 months. And as a matter of fact, I'm one of them. And when I think about the hard work and sacrifice that I put into my job, I had to reconcile that this change is happening to me. And as I have connected with others through various networks, professional networks, as I mentioned, just my women veteran networks, it is alarming and also disappointing, because what we've had is this false narrative that America has created. I define it as the big lie, right?
Right.
Serve your country or serve in some capacities, educate yourself, pull yourself up from your bootstraps. Don't expect anything from anyone. And there's this old saying, specifically for Black people, work twice as hard for half the recognition. It's been told to us generationally to do that. And so we do all that, and it's still not good enough. And so when I have conversations now with individuals about, the what's next, there is a huge challenge with not just selling ourselves, but to what I was mentioning is believing it, and believing that you have the value that another organization could use. And what so many women are running into right now is these organizations are being very intentional about who's selected or not. It's not that you qualify for the job. We can look at what's happening in our country now. Qualifications now, I think, is disguised as meritocracy. We know that that's not the case, because when you look at the most educated group, it is Black women. So now education is not looked at as, valuable. And then we start looking at a lot of the challenges that are being faced. And so I read an article the other day that so many Black women are going into owning their own companies, consulting firms, and becoming entrepreneurs, but they're not addressing that mental preparedness for it. And that's what concerns me, Dr. Tilton. They're moving from a transactional standpoint, but at the heart of being disconnected from their identity and feeling targeted. My fear is that they're not addressing the emotional realities and the mental preparedness for that next role. And I just think about some of the consequences that they may face by not addressing those.
Yeah, I think it's important to really be mentally prepared, especially when you're starting a new venture, like becoming an entrepreneur, opening your own office or practice, or the like. Because otherwise, if you haven't, really become like emotionally resilient and put a lot of thought into it, been very intentional, that might not go well either. And then you're going to have, oh my God, I failed again, or and it's not a failure to lose a job. It's not, and I don't want that to be the message, but sometimes people think that when they lose a job.
Mm-hmm.
And, there could be a million reasons why you did lose the job, whether it's restructuring, layoffs, or, it just wasn't a good fit.
True.
And so that may be a blessing in disguise, because then you could look for something that's a better fit. You'd probably be happier someplace else where it's a good fit for you. Hopefully.
I do agree. And I think, to your point and what you shared earlier, I think if they've not really addressed it through therapy, it's important to realize what you shared, to identify those stressors when you are burnt out, when you are dealing with anxiety, when you could potentially be depressed. I think what you shared earlier was really spot on, because if the person doesn't address that, one, if they can't identify it, but if they don't find mechanisms to really solution for it, get the therapy they need, connect with the right positive groups and people, then they're carrying that into that next role, right?
Yeah. And I think for someone to assess their values, what they value from a job or from a company, make a list of, what's most important to you in the workplace. Pros and cons of, certainly when you get an offer from someone, pros and cons of taking that position. Really, these are all things I would want to work with someone in therapy. If someone doesn't have, the luxury of doing that because of financial stuff or lack of insurance, these are things they could do, by themselves, and just really look at. I'm a big fan of lists, so I think, write down, okay, this is how my anxiety is impacting my life. Like, not maybe it's impacting my relationship with my significant other, or my relationship with my children, or, like, we said earlier, appetite or sleep disruption.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's great. I love that we're, reiterating that, because I don't think that many women have stopped to assess that. I think the focus is, I need to just get out here and I need to go get a job. And because I think what most avoid is the realities, and they may be internalizing displacement as a personal failure, to your
Exactly.
point. And
Yeah.
what they should be focusing in on is not looking at it. They should not tie their value or worth to that job. But if they are internalizing it, what are some things? I know you just talked about it, but I really want to be clear with the group, especially for women who may be internalizing displacements. What would you recommend specifically around the internalizing that as a personal failure?
Yeah, because people do internalize it. And then a lot of times they externalize successes and they think, oh, that was just luck, or, you
Mm-hmm.
know, they give it there's some other attribution to how that was successful, and and it doesn't include yourself. And really, those should be like flipped. And, because you should internalize, I've had a lot of successes and this is why. And, externally, they restructure the company. That has nothing to do with me. Did they go through and look at how people perform in their job? Probably to a certain extent. Um, but it's really important for someone to be resilient, because that's going to have a huge impact on how they present themselves. And they
Absolutely.
could do that by, going through and listing their successes in this job or other jobs, or, what skills they have that are transferable that might be unique.
Absolutely. And consider another path, right?
Yeah.
So I talked a little bit about, reinventing themselves
Yeah.
into entrepreneurialism, becoming a consultant, taking those years of experience,
Yeah.
being able to share. And we talked earlier about volunteerism is a way that you can get experience with different industries and different individuals.
Yeah.
But
You
I
might
think
meet someone volunteering that,
Mhm.
that will lead to a job. Someone refers you to someone, refers you to someone, then that results in a job. You just don't know.
Absolutely.
But if you don't go out
Absolutely.
and do it, then. But yeah,
Absolutely.
I mean, I mentioned earlier when, maybe losing a job that, you really take some time to maybe even, thinking outside the box to take how can I pivot at this point in my career or this point in my life to do something that I really will enjoy, that I'll be good at. Um, just give that a lot of thought.
I would agree. And I think it's being able to recognize that, the shift or pivot from one job and where you've built your years and your identity, reconcile that. It is okay to go through the change. And I know at one point in organizations, we would train on change management. Revert back to that learning and better understand it's okay to shift and pivot, because if you don't reconcile that and get the right therapy and be mentally prepared, you're going to bring all of that into that new opportunity. And one group that people tend to forget is those that are assimilating in new cultures and new opportunities. Definitely disconnect how you were treated in X company. Your job was eliminated. Write that list. I love your point, Dr. Tilton. Make a list of all the things that you're good at, that you contributed, that you really enjoy, and focus in on a positive list as you're transitioning to a new opportunity, because the internalizing that as a failure, I think, could have consequences in a new opportunity. You have to
Yeah.
decide.
Yeah, and another thing, someone can really think about or write down is, what did I take from that old position? Like, what did I learn there that I
Oh,
can use, presenting it to someone you interview in the future, like as a really positive experience, instead of, yeah, I got laid off. It was, have been struggling since then. Not that you would necessarily say that in an interview, but,
right.
but to, really say, oh, it was a good experience. I learned a lot from it. This is what I took away from it. So it just, you are presented in a better light because you're
Yes.
being really positive.
Mhm. And you're shifting from survival to empowerment, right?
Exactly.
It's that continuum. It's like facing the realities, but it is the cognizant shift from survival mode to empowerment. And maybe start by asking a question: what can I learn from this, and where do I go next? And focusing on possibilities rather than the losses, right? I was having a conversation with
Yeah.
another client about an internal talent move, and the leaders looked at it as, I'm going to lose this high potential talent. And I remember saying, don't look at it as a talent loss, look at it as a talent movement. You're retaining your talent. And we have to look at job loss like that. You know, you have an now opportunity to shift from surviving. If you know, like, so let me segment these groups. For those who are already displaced and they know their fate, it's navigating through that. But I'm also empathetic to those individuals who are still in organizations, the one I'm having conversations with now, and people won't know their fate, right? And so they need to be preparing themselves for, I could potentially be impacted by this. And so the survival mode moves to, how am I empowered? What will I learn from this? Like, starting early, I think is going to be great, where you can carve out and dedicate that time to yourself, especially if you know your organization is about to make major shifts and changes. The sad ones are the ones that they're caught off guard and they have given their entire all to these companies. But if you know that you've been told from a transparency standpoint that your organization is about to make conduct some layoffs or displacements, prepare yourself so you're not reacting.
Yeah, and I mean, I've heard stories, from the media that, someone just got an email one day saying you're no longer needed, clear out your desk immediately. Thanks for your service. Bye. And that, especially, I can even imagine how that would make someone feel.
Yeah.
I think, that's kind of belittling their contribution, and, even to get like a severance package or whatever. Yeah. I think that would be even more stressful.
Which is so true, and which is why, as you think about the individual and organizations, where I love this conversation, because the individual should be focusing on what are her needs, right? The woman should be thinking, I know we're talking broader, but specifically, what are your needs? Because the organization is going to report out that we got rid of X number of jobs and saved this many people. And to your point, how insensitive is it if you've given these 5, 10, 15 plus years and you come into an email? And a lot of organizations have done that. They'll report an earning, and then the next day individuals will be displaced. And that is where the organization is focused on the bottom line.
Yeah.
And, that old saying, when we came through working our way up in our careers, the people are the most important. I don't know if that is true in today's workforce. That's why you have to love yourself and take care of yourself, because if you rely on the organization's resources, they could be minuscule. You may not get what you need.
Yeah. And, I've heard of some companies making people write, here's your job description. How are you doing that on a daily basis? So they have to pretty much justify why they shouldn't be fired by writing, how great they are and everything they do on a daily basis that's important to the organization. And that would be stressful too. Okay. Maybe thinking, okay, if I don't write this exactly right, then I'll probably be one of the people who gets let go. Yeah. The pressure of that.
That is major pressure. Or just as you think about just assimilating in different organizational cultures, right? How challenging that could be, because I still believe that you had high school bullies. That's all they did is graduate and go over to the organization. So you still
it didn't change. Got older.
Did not change. And if you're not fitting in or feeling like that you're an anomaly in an organization, one, I think that's horrible. But I do think that, to your point, imagine the pressure I'm having to sell my contributions and sell it in a way that's going to potentially have an impact on my job. And imagine the stress that individuals are having to contend with. So what do you think the responsibilities or the organizations have in supporting workforce mental readiness? Because I'm not seeing a lot of companies do it. And just based on your experience, what would you recommend? I mean, if you have a head of HR or business leaders, listening to this podcast, what words would you use to influence them to really be thinking about workforce mental readiness?
From a company's perspective, I would recommend, that they go to EAP. Mm-hmm. Some employees don't feel comfortable going to EAP because they think it won't be confidential. Mm-hmm. It's supposed to be. Maybe it's not in some companies. I don't know, but I know that is a concern of some people. I think from the company's perspective, really encouraging people to, for self-care, like, still exercise, or start exercising, and, you know, eat healthy, and, don't drink a lot, and, all the things we said, from a holistic perspective. They could host, okay, during your lunch hour, get in a group and walk, for 20, 30 minutes. Get out there and get some fresh air, get some exercise,
Mhm.
talk to your colleagues, promote, doing, like, if they have a relationship with other companies in the community, say, like, they could recommend, oh, for our company, you can do yoga there for only $15 instead of $30, or,
Mm.
things like that. They could reach out to people in the community, to provide healthy services for their employees.
I think those are awesome ideas. I think organizations, just to add more, they have a responsibility, and I would say just to communicate transparently. You're dealing with adults. Be
Yeah.
honest with individuals. I do respect organizations that will be honest in saying we're looking at a potential reduction in force. I would rather you be honest with me
Yeah.
than not. And I think what they should be setting are realistic expectations. I think, one of the things that I've heard is you have certain groups that tend to have the or bear the weight of the organization versus others. I mean, setting realistic expectations when it comes to individuals and groups are there. I love your point around providing access to resources. I think the community engagement is a great way of giving back,
Mhm.
partnering, like you said, with local organizations if you're doing yoga, but celebrate employees. There was a point in time in our organizations where there used to be employee recognition, right?
Exactly. And
Atta girls and atta boys. We have diluted that to the point where I'm not even sure if organizations realize how encouraging that is, especially if someone is really struggling and really trying to deliver. I think what you're going to create when people feel supported is their mental readiness, their preparedness. There's the clarity. I know I'm appreciated. I feel valued, right? And then that is associated with productivity. I'm not sure where we lost sight as organizations, where when you start thinking about the org culture, people are at the bottom of the list.
yeah, and when I was doing correctional psychology, one of the places I worked was Cook County Jail, and I was kind of surprised. I was kind of surprised at how much they did for their employees to recognize the hard work they did, or we all
Mhm.
did, and their achievements. And they would take, like, once a quarter, we would all take off the last couple of hours and go, to a restaurant,
Mhm.
and all get to know each other on a more, informal basis, rather than just, I see you in the hallway and you ask a professional question. Um, Always being told, you guys are doing a great job. It's really hard to work here. We appreciate your hard work, stuff like
Absolutely.
that. And it did make you feel good. And I think it gave you even more motivation to keep performing at that level or a higher level.
I agree with you. It's a business imperative. I think workforce mental readiness should be viewed as a business imperative and not so much as an employee benefit. And I think when organizations look at it as an employee benefit, they're thinking, well, you're lucky. It should be really built into the fabric of the organization, just being transparent, providing the resources. And most organizations lose sight of, as we keep talking about, the connection between mental readiness, career preparedness, and organizational success. I think people are disconnecting because productivity is at the heart and key of what organizations are looking for. And that's why the mental preparedness is there. But I want to back up real quick, Dr. Tilton, because what I definitely appreciate you talking about is EAP. And as I've had conversations with companies and others, the what I'm learning is the engagement with EAPs and companies is so low. And I think a lot of it has to do with, perceptions that, with EAP, it's not confidential. I think it's a huge lose, right?
It
People,
is.
organizations lose. What would you say to encourage, those individuals who are in decision-making roles in organizations looking at this to leverage EAP? I mean, I just think it's so critical and we're losing sight of it.
Yeah. I mean, I think something as simple as putting up flyers,
Mhm.
around the company, saying, feeling stressed, and, or, it doesn't even have to be work concerns. It could be like, experiencing financial difficulties,
I love it.
Family issues, go talk to EAP. It's free. You get, like 12 sessions or something like that. And it is confidential, and encouraging people who work, the mental health people who are in the EAP program, to really stress to them when someone comes to see them, these are the parameters of confidentiality. This is, I cannot tell what we talk about here unless, you say you're going to hurt someone or hurt yourself. It's the only time I can reveal, what's going on, something you may have said. Otherwise, I could lose my license if I don't provide good confidentiality. So like, don't worry, this goes no further.
I love that.
Some
And
people
I
might
would
not
encourage.
understand that.
Right, right. And I love the reason why I wanted to bring it up is because I saw somewhere recently where EAP is offered at companies. I think the numbers are very low for employees
Yeah, I
who
believe it.
actually engage with EAP. And I think that's where companies like Lamco Wellness is there, because I think for employees to feel comfortable, it almost feels like, and I hate to use it from a family structure, I'm going to go talk to my grandma about my mom and dad. Right.
Right.
And not to minimize it as such, but I just think about, we have to have Lamco Wellness. We have to have organizations where people feel comfortable, because at the heart of it, it's trust. And if I don't
Right.
trust what you're going to say or do, then how do I know that's going to have an impact? And think about it. I'm trying to survive in this job. I'm already dealing with the other stressors. But for those who don't have that, if you have the need, I would encourage you, definitely take advantage of EAP. Those are licensed therapists and psychologists who are able to help you navigate, especially those critical components of your life. But I just think organizations don't do a good job of encouraging the use of it. And to your point, highlighting that this is a confidential opportunity and looking at that as a business imperative versus just an employee benefit.
Yeah, and I've heard, employees say, I don't, besides the concerns for confidentiality, concern like, well, I don't want other people to know I'm going because that's embarrassing, or I just don't
Mhm.
want people to know my business, or, and it's at work. And I guess that could be, I think that's valid.
It is.
Um, those are valid concerns.
I would agree.
And I would hope at any company, there's no way of other people finding out that you're going. That, that's what we want ideally.
Yeah.
For them to, it's no one else's business.
It's not. And I
There's
think organizations should share that. I think there should be some kind of reimagining the EAP partnership and really being exclusive and saying this is confidential. It is for you. We won't know. I saw statistically where more women, with the small percentage that do utilize EAP, a large majority of those are women.
okay.
Right. So that is slightly good news. The concern is it should be available for all employees because it's not being maximized. And I just think that's a cost. And, as I think about it, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say that this is where organizations really need to think about a Lamco Wellness and really thinking outside of. And while they have the EAPs, I'm not trying to take jobs from EAP companies, but most employees will feel more comfortable going outside of it. My concern is for the person and less about the business, right?
Yeah. And for them to emphasize also, use these resources before you're at, totally burned out.
Yes.
Use them for support so you can keep doing a great job. It doesn't have to be like, when things have hit rock bottom, to prioritize your well-being and your health before it's negatively impacting your job or your personal life.
I love it. And if you haven't considered it, for anyone that will be listening to this podcast, definitely leverage your EAP. But we also have Lamco Wellness. And for organizations who are really looking for just thinking about how do I navigate through that, with Symmetry Alliance, that's exactly what we do. The work that we do here is not limited to just org restructures. What you'll get is full consulting that looks at the business and the people, which means there's going to be impacts. And I think we lose sight of them. They're all in different lanes, but all critical and very, very important for sure.
Yeah. And sometimes, people will say, well, I'm already so busy, with my kids and work, and that's completely valid, that they're like, I don't have time to go to therapy, or, I can't afford to drive another, 20 miles to see my therapist after work. I just don't have the time. Which I think that's where Lamco Wellness comes in, is that it makes it substantially easier because you could do it over telehealth. And you're still getting the exact same services, which is great support for you. Someone to, listen, you guys be your advocate, you guys work on things together to move forward. And, that's the benefit of it.
And I'd also say the fact that it's connecting the mental preparedness and career readiness, because both go hand in hand. They're co-joined, they're not individual. And I think for those who are struggling, landing in the next role, and to your point, maybe dealing with stress or burnout or anxiety, being able to identify that and then leverage the services that are offered is great, because you rarely have where the focus is on both. Right. And while I definitely know mental wellness is going to be key to sustainability, and as people evolve, you have to also match that with how do you get career? How are you ready for any kind of career change, position change, evolution within the organization? And I don't know if many organizations are connecting the dots, but I would encourage them to really think about, what's being discussed in this capacity, because it's going to be the long-term successful organizations that are thinking about the needs of their people from a mental preparedness, well-being standpoint. I truly believe that.
And people can often think that they might not understand or know that much about mental health, and they might not know, like, this is anxiety, this is depression, this is stress, it's all, this is grief, it's all different. They might just be like, I don't feel good. And so, having the support of either an EAP program or, maybe after the fact of being displaced, going to a therapist or, whoever you choose to go see, even talking to your PCP about it. And then maybe they can give you some suggestions at the beginning so they can point you in the right direction.
I love that.
It's just being able to recognize that things maybe aren't going that well after you were displaced, or maybe before you were displaced, and that it's really important to be your best self in order to be ready to go back to work, to be ready to start applying to new jobs. And you need to take that time to recognize everything good about yourself and what you've accomplished.
Yes, I just love that, because, for me, I think we spend a great deal of time preparing people for jobs and careers and promotion, and we spend far less time preparing them for uncertainty, disruption, or transition. So mental readiness for me is just one of the most important professional competencies that we can develop. And I just realize how important this conversation is. And as I think about the engagements that I do from in my role owning Symmetry Alliance, it's getting that message to leaders and having them pause just to hear what I'm saying to them, because again, they have to be willing to listen and understand, because the first thing is, bottom line, I need to save X number of dollars. And so the focus is on, what do I need to restructure? Well, those dots and those little blocks on that spreadsheet, those are people. Right.
Yeah. And, to let companies know that by investing in your employees' mental health, you're going to get better performances out of them. They're going to be more successful at their job. They're going to be more engaged at work. When someone feels good, they perform better.
Absolutely. It's a productivity issue. You're absolutely right. When people are mentally prepared, they're better equipped to navigate change, seize opportunities, and thrive regardless of the future change. So I just think all of those things are absolutely important. But again, mental preparedness is one of the most important professional competencies that I'd really want individuals to walk away with. And if you are in a capacity where you're making decisions for your organization, if you're leading HR, and I'd even, share if you are interacting right now with, using your displacement services packages, I would encourage you to ask what services are available for my mental preparedness, because we've talked about it before, Dr. Tilton. A lot of those companies focus in on the resume writing, updating their LinkedIn. All of those things are important. But if you're not mentally prepared, right? For that interview, for that engagement, then all of that is for nothing. So
Yeah, because you might be trying to, change those things and update them and everything, and think, oh, doing it kind of not to your full capability.
absolutely.
You say like, oh, that's good enough, or whatever, and because you get tired, or and you're just kind of depressed about what's going to happen in the future, so you're not putting your best effort into that either. And you
I would
should.
agree. I was going to say, I agree. Well, this has been fabulous.
Yeah,
Every time we get together,
yeah, it's a good
I love
conversation.
it. I think what we have bridged is that organizational and mental wellness perspectives. And I love this conversation because we face the emotional realities, and the insight and the encouragement and the information is not just for individuals, it's for organizations. But the partnership here is fabulous, and I have absolutely enjoyed it. But I would leave it to you, and as a professional in this space, what are the final words that you would share with anyone who is dealing with displacement, disruption, any kind of change right now?
Um, I would just say, you are a good person. You have a lot of good skills. You're going to get through this. Take the time to grieve, take the time to, realize that you're more than being an employee. You have all of the roles in life, and you want to succeed at those as well. And you can. Um, and by doing some good self care, you will be more successful and you'll feel better.
Absolutely. In organizations, as we've been discussing, um, the mental readiness and well-being is tied to productivity. So definitely consider those employees as you're having discussions and
Mhm.
thinking about the change. And again, as Dr. Tilton and I discussed earlier, leverage your EAP services.
Yeah.
Do whatever you need to do to rebuild the trust, but it is available for you. Again, it's business imperative that organizations make sure that they have a mentally prepared workforce. And we encourage you to reach out to Symmetry Alliance or Lamco Wellness with any of your needs within that space. So Dr. Tilden has been great. I thank
Yeah.
you for sharing your time with me. I look forward to our next
Yeah. It's good to see
conversation,
you.
and you have a great work week.
Okay. You too.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you, everyone.